What do you get when you combine high fantasy, a wisecracking hard-boiled detective, a beautiful thief, devious elves, arcane magic, shadow dogs, a very bitey horse, and a backwoods doomsday cult? Well, that's what you get with my new novel, Never Sleep Scrolls: The Mind Thief Murders. Hi, I'm author Phil Walton, and I invite you to join me on this in-depth preview of my debut fantasy novel. So what is The Mind Thief Murders all about? Here's a brief summary. When his old friend is killed by a psychotic elf, a determined investigator is hell-bent on finding answers. What he uncovers is a twisted conspiracy of powerful enemies who are all vying for a magical artifact that could devastate the city. The book is an homage to the hard-boiled detective novels of Raymond Chandler and Dashiell Hammett, but is set in a rich, complex fantasy world. It is also filled with humor and heart, with twists and turns, and an explosive ending that does a good job tying up all the threads. So what kind of story is it? Another Tolkien ripoff? Or a story about a special chosen one from the real world who has to go to some unique magical school and is destined to defeat the Dark Lord? Maybe it's one of these with a naming convention of a book of words and pages, which for some reason is just a series of explicit sex scenes linked together by the thinnest plot. It's none of these things, actually. Basically, I wrote the story that I would want to read. I think if it appeals to me, it'll probably appeal to you as well. It's full of clever twists and reveals, sparkling dialogue, and a fast-paced plot that keeps you turning pages to the very end. The people who have read it frequently say it's really fun, and I take that as a huge compliment. In crafting this tale of mystery and intrigue, I did my best to avoid writing tropes and cliches of either fantasy or the detective genres. I didn't want to write a pastiche. What I hope you find is a world that feels big and real, with characters that are complex and nuanced, folks you want to root for, and the ones that you just hope are going to get justice at the end. Believe me, they do. The story of any hard-boiled detective is the story of a city. In the Never Sleep Scrolls series, the city is what I imagine Los Angeles of the 1930s was like. A bustling port city, a nexus of commerce and trade, and one that is riding high in the recent military victory. Arathes was built into a mountain by elves, and they still form its ruling elite. It is a raucous place, vibrant and filled with opportunity and also vice. A city where gangsters and criminals rub elbows with the beautiful and the rich, and where it's not always easy to tell them apart. It is also a place where the lowliest man can rise to become something great. This is where we meet our hero, Frank Neversleep. Let's meet the man at the heart of our story. Frank Neversleep is a human who has risen to a unique and tenuous position of authority in a powerful elf family. His job is preceptor, which is part spy master, part investigator. Basically, he's a fixer. He identifies issues and solves them before they become problems. Frank also fits the requirements for your typical noir detective. He's wisecracking, hard drinking, and he doesn't quit until he solves the case. But remember, this is also a fantasy story, so there are elves who live hundreds of years, and wizards and trickster fae, and demons, monsters, dark arcane magic, Lovecraftian creatures from unfathomable realms. How can one simple human contend with such forces? There are things I don't like about typical fantasy protagonists found in the genre. Many of them are badass fighters that can chop down any challenger, or summon magic at a critical moment to save the day. Sometimes they're hidden royalty, or their prophecy to defeat the Dark Lord. Frank is none of these things. He's just a guy who's getting by in his wits and his charm. I think it's his determination that makes him special. Frank isn't the only one in the city with a mission. The other important character we meet is a woman named Kyla Gracefire. She's what's called a Lindblood, who are rumored to be humans descended from a race of angelic beings. She's supernaturally beautiful. Her appearance has some kind of enchantment which draws attention to her. Now, one might think that's a good thing, but in her line of work as a master thief, that's more of a detriment. Kyla is no femme fatale, however. She's tough and smart and capable, but also with flaws and vulnerabilities which make her feel real and relatable. At the start of the story, Kyla is the survivor of a deal gone wrong and is now trying to find the last remaining member of her crew, whom she desperately hopes is still alive. What I like about Kyla is that she's not there to be a romantic interest for Frank. She has her own story, and her interests only sometimes align with Frank's. In the center of all this intrigue is a mysterious artifact, what Alfred Hitchcock would have called a MacGuffin. It's basically the thing everyone is trying to get their hands on. What is it? What is its purpose? What dark and terrible magic can it unleash? Well, this is your spoiler warning, so if you don't want to know too much, skip ahead now. Alright, you've been warned. So early in the story, Frank finds a small and rather dull necklace at a crime scene of his murdered friend. He stashes it away and forgets about it. But this small piece of jewelry is actually a very powerful artifact called the Mind Thief. It's imbued with a charm that makes people bored and disinterested in it when they see it, and it creates even more resistance if someone tries to put it on. But why? Well, its previous owners didn't want anyone else to have its power. The Mind Thief can view thoughts, read minds, and even control other people's actions. It may not look like much, but its power in the wrong hands could be devastating. Unfortunately for Frank, there's several bad people who all have sinister intentions for it and will do anything to achieve their ends. What crime story would be complete without a few criminals? Well, it just so happens that the city of Arathes is full of them, ranging from the petty and unscrupulous to the megalomaniacal. Early in the story, Frank takes an impulsive action which makes him the prime target of the dangerous Fernbrook family of elves. They were already casting an envious gaze upon the prosperous Blackroot district, and will now use this new opportunity to strike. Their own preceptor, Farathiel Gingerglade, is a cunning and devious elf who keeps showing up at all the wrong moments and seems to be getting the upper hand over Frank. All clues point to the Fernbrooks as the puppet masters behind the string of murders. But what is the larger plan behind it? Further complicating Frank's investigation is the wicked-looking warlock named Brimblade. Somehow his appearance always coincides with the arrival of new and terrible arcane monsters. And yet, going after Frank doesn't seem to be his true goal. Are there even more foes lurking in the shadows for Frank and company? You'll have to read and find out. Let's talk about all the things that go bump in the night and one thing that goes chomp in the day. Speaking of monsters, Frank encounters several in this story which are unique to this world. The first are called Blackhounds. They are made of smoke and teeth. They only turn solid in the light. And unfortunately, they come out at night. The second is a terrifying beast called a Shade Scourge. It's about the size of a bear with huge eyes and long claws, and it is very, very good at killing. On the plus side though, Frank has a few animals who aren't exactly friends, but come to his aid whenever they feel like it. The first are the feral lizard cats in the city called Scrates. They are considered a mild if ubiquitous nuisance by the elves, but Frank has taught a few of them to deliver messages for him, just like carrier pigeons. And by far, the fan favorite of the story is Frank's huge warhorse called Jimothy. He's massive and ill-tempered, and he loves to bite. Frank is not in control of this horse. I've always wanted to tell a detective story, and when my good friend Dustin asked if I'd be willing to write something within the fantasy world he created, I saw this as my chance. No, Phil, this is a fantasy world. Yeah, with a detective, it's gonna be perfect. And that is how the Mind Thief murders came to be. The overall writing of the first draft came out quickly, and I actually didn't have to rewrite very much of the book in the editing process. The characters and themes seemed to have already been alive and waiting to jump onto the page when I first sat down on my laptop. My plan after it had been written was to release it as an audiobook chapters on YouTube, Apple, and Spotify. They're still there if anyone is interested. It took me another 6 to 8 months to cut and edit all of these chapters. I released them as weekly episodes over the course of a year. My goal had been to have people discover the book as weekly serials, hopefully driving interest in a print edition. But the YouTube algorithm was not in my favor. I did get a little interest, but not much. no throng of adoring fans demanding the print book. So after it was fully released, I sat back and thought about what to do next. Then something odd happened. The idea for a sequel began to form in my mind. All of the pieces and parts began locking together, much like in the first book. I had no choice but to begin writing it all down. But as I got partway through, I was reminded that the first book was still sitting there, waiting to go to print. And so with fresh eyes, I was able to dive back into the Mind Thief murders and begin to get it ready for publication. I had the benefit of knowing some of the elements of the sequel, so I could begin to weave in some of the sneaky little setups into the first book. And now, here it is, my first novel in Book 1 of the Neversleep Scrolls saga. How many will there be? I don't know. But I've got a trilogy planned so far, and who knows where the future may lead. Thank you all for watching this video and learning more about my book. Hopefully I've convinced you that it's worth going out and picking up. I will leave you with this one final pitch. The Mind Thief Murders is a fast-paced thrill ride of a story that I know you'll love reading as much as I love writing it. If you do read it and love it, please leave me a 5-star review wherever you can, and tell other people about it. Also, if you have any questions or want to discuss this story, leave them in the comments, and I'll try to answer them in subsequent videos. Thank you so much.